In Chapter 5, we learn how to manage project risk. Risk is defined in terms of its bottom line, the probability that something will happen with a negative impact on the project's budget, schedule, deliverables, or any combination of them. To grab a hold of this risk and manage it, project leaders need a risk management plan and a general way of approaching risk. The plan and approach involves knowing where to look for risk, assessing the risk once it is found, and deciding on how to handle the risk. We will need to develop a plan for responding to risk as it arises. Once the planning is done, attention turns to handling risk on the run, checking for risk as it arises in a project execution and handling it as it does. This is an agenda slide to introduce the topics of risk sources. Risk comes from project management. Problems coming from the planning and execution of the project. Then we have the risk from the host organization, which is problems that come from within the organization that is hosting the project. We have deliverable risk, problems that may occur to the deliverables of the project in terms of the client or the end user satisfaction. And finally, the external risks. These are problems that can come from the larger physical, economic, and market environment of the project. So what do we need to know in terms of project planning? First, there can be inadequate risk from WBS. This is one of the most common sources of risk. Tasks left out of the WBS. The ability to see what is not included in a plan is a real talent. Support tasks are commonly overlooked, else might be missing. We have the risk of cost and time estimates. Some deliverables and tasks to produce them are fairly well known. When not well known, the cost and time involved require more attention. When resources are volunteered by the host organization, some kind of cost and time estimates should also be made. Staffing risks are due to not enough staff, or they're not available when you need them, or the staff does not have the right knowledge, skills, and abilities for the job. Finally is the logistics, getting the right tools, materials, and other resources to the job site when needed, often overlooked by less experienced project leaders. Logistics are often considered boring and sometimes not given the proper attention. Then we have the risk from project execution. This is the command and control or the leadership structure. Who has the authority and responsibility for doing various parts of the project? It becomes more of a risk the larger and more complex the project becomes, because more people and critical jobs become involved. There are risks from the leadership roles, time demands, and capabilities not well understood. There's also a need for monitoring, especially the milestone reviews at critical points. We use tools like the earned value analysis for this. Project teams and processes need strong communication. Information will flow to the right people when needed. They're also needed for decision making. Everyone with important information, knowledge, and project responsibilities are involved. And finally, the project team and processes are needed for coordination. People know about the project event that will affect them. People who need to work together, hopefully, are doing so. Recall that the host organization is either 1, hosting a project for an outside client, or 2, hosting a project for its own use. Many sources of risk are the same for both kinds of host organizations, but may surface in different ways. For the organizational support, we need support from higher management for the project. Projects need to be championed by higher leadership, particularly when problems arise. It's also needed for funding and other resource allocations. Getting funding on time as the project moves forward is critical. Volunteered support may not come through as assumed. There's often resistance to promised or ordered help from other parts of the organization. And how about the organizational politics? It's a fact that projects will compete for resources. Projects within host organizations can develop opponents to the means or goals of the project. Successful projects advance the careers of their leaders, sometimes at the derailment of others and other projects. The risk that deliverables will not meet quality or performance requirements need to be discussed. Let's first talk about technical problems. Risk goes up the more deliverables push the boundaries of unknown science, or simply the knowledge, skills, and abilities of those working on the project. There are also other problems. The project requires that organizational changes be made in the use of tools, materials, and operations. Making changes that actually work is often very difficult. Changes push at the limits of our knowledge, and changes invite resistance. So there are several issues to consider. First, how easy will it be to deliver the product or service? As difficulty increases, so does risk. The second question is, how demanding are the clients? Some clients are more demanding than others. Clients often have different areas of concern. For example, cost versus performance issues. External risks come from problems that may emerge from the project's larger environment. Let's talk about 5 external risks. First is the client and the end user. Clients are those who are paying for the project. How demanding they are and their tendency to push the scope of the project to include more deliverables can be risk factors. Because they are your customer, a great deal of attention needs to be given to them. End users are those who will be actually using the deliverables. Deliverables must address their needs and suitability for use. Consider planning and budgeting for field testing. The second external risk is the vendors and other suppliers. Internal suppliers in the host organization may resist providing resources. Regulations can shut down a project or render its deliverables useless for the client. There's a risk from the market dynamics. Risks for deliverables. In some markets, such as electronics, products to be delivered compete with products of the competition. If demand is high for project resources, it can produce cost and scheduling problems. The last external risk to consider is the physical environment itself. Weather is always a problem for outdoor work. Weather can also affect the availability or delivery of resources. Hopefully, with the projects that you are implementing from the Educational Lean project, you will not have to worry too much about external risks. This is an agenda slide for the 2 basic approaches to risk assessment that are coming. This slide includes as well the ultimate impact problems have on a project. When problems arise in a project, they can, number 1, have an effect on the cost and therefore the budget of a project. 2, stretch out the time it takes to get the project finished. And 3, make the deliverables fall below client expectations or make them completely unusable. Looking at qualitative risk assessment is likely the most common approach to assessing project risk, assessing the likelihood a problem will occur. These assessments are often judged to be low, medium, or high. This may be the most often used risk assessment in practice because when a risk is identified, a quick assessment is made about its likelihood. If it's judged to be low or unlikely, the risk assessor moves on to another risk. The risk, of course, is in dismissing the likelihood of a risk too easily without sufficient consideration. Assessing the impact of problem occurrence from minor to major. These judgments are often assessed as minor, medium, or major in their likely impact. If a risk is judged to be somewhat more likely, attention turns to how much of a problem it can produce. As potential harm assessments go up, more attention is given to how the risk might be addressed. Qualitative assessments can be formalized into quite useful procedures with clear identification of low to high evaluations of risk occurring and the potential harm. Probabilities are given in estimates of 0 to 100% likelihood the problem will come up. We also try to estimate the cost if a problem occurs. Estimates are then given in terms of the likely cost to the project if the problem does emerge. Most common is dollar cost, but other costs can be assessed, such as the amount of time. This will impact dollar cost, but attention may want to be given to time. The expected value of the risk equals the probability of its occurrence times the estimated cost. Although expected value is technically correct, expected cost may make more sense to the audience. Actual numbers with probability and cost allow other kinds of calculations. The advantage of using quantifiable risk estimates is that they can be used in calculations of risks. The expected values of risk in any one component of the project, for example, might be integrated into its budget and added to the price of the project. Risk responses are developed for potential problems that are risky enough to warrant further consideration. Risks with a low probability of occurring or low negative impact are often accepted. Other times, projects are simply forced to accept some risks. It might be mentioned that risks not known or fully considered are also accepted. When projects accept risk that may have a high negative impact, it is worthwhile to think through a contingency plan to use in case a problem begins to emerge. Triggers are events that signal a problem is beginning to emerge. It is best to think through contingency plans and triggers in advance to catch a problem early and to have thought out how best to approach it. Although these plans may be altered in light of new facts, they provide a better base of action than a reflective response in the heat of a battle. Reducing the probability of the risk usually calls for looking at a potential source of the risk or problem. Once identified, those sources are addressed in advance. Developing contingency plans is one approach to minimizing potential harm. If the problem does not emerge, for example, more resources may be mobilized to minimize its negative impact. Even when we handle risk, how we do so creates risk of its own, which is called sometimes secondary risks. It's good then to have a risk plan moving forward. Essentially, a list of foreseen risks and what is being done about it. Risk registers can be very formalized, but they do not have to be. For smaller projects, like you're doing with the Educational Lean project, a simple reminder list may do. They do need to address certain elements. One of the elements is anticipated problems. Big problems should be anticipated as much as possible. Sufficient time and due diligence need to be paid to risk. Recall that triggers are events that signal a problem may be emerging. Risk owners are responsible for monitoring and responding to risk and problems as they arise. Risk owners need to review potential problems as they might appear in their part of the project as the project moves forward. This reviewing responsibility needs to go up the chain of command with each level of risk owner. Risk owners need to take responsibility for their project areas. They can do this by informing others when appropriate. Risk owners should be empowered to handle emerging problems on their own if possible. They need to inform others, however, when a potential problem can affect other operations. Be cautious of how you treat those who bring problems to you. Don't punish the bearer of bad news. People are naturally reluctant to bring their boss bad news, particularly in the areas of operation. If you punish them for doing so, the word will get out not to bring bad news to your attention. When you get bad news, focus on how to deal with the problem, not on blame. Wait until the immediate problem is handled before reviewing it for deeper sources of the problem. There are several times when we want to review the actions of a project, when it is completed and at significant points during the project. Help the project leader and others develop their knowledge and skills for future projects. After action reviews should include attention to the risks that were dealt with successfully, those that were not, and to the problems that were unanticipated. Review successes and failures at handling risk after significant milestones, after significant risk events, and after the project is completed. Make sure to capture lessons learned.